I was a victim of an online scam, but things took a turn as the scam progressed. And now I'm paying the price. I'll start by saying I met a man named Wilson Potter on Facebook. He commented on one of my posts that I did on a news page that he found my profile photo beautiful, loved my comment, and would love to get to know me better. I replied to him and said thank you, and then he asked if I could send him a friend request. I told him sure, and at the time I pretty much friended anybody. I didn't care who they were. I just liked having a lot of Facebook friends. I thought it was a great way to meet new people, and I never thought about the consequences of friending strangers. Wilson and I started talking more and more. We would chat in Messenger, and he told me that he was an engineer working in the oil rig and oil industry. He worked for Exxon, and he was currently overseas on a contract. When I asked him where he was, he said that he was in Malaysia, but he had just gotten back from West Africa doing a large oil contract. I asked him if he lived in Malaysia or where, and he said no, he's only here on contract, and that he had a home in Florida. But I asked him where in Florida. He said Miami. I live in Upper Michigan, and I've never been to Florida, but the warm weather sounded lovely, and I told him that. He laughed and just said, yes, it's very nice. I have a large house on the beach. He asked if I was married, and I told him no, I was divorced. My ex-husband and I have been divorced for a little over 2 years. He told me that he was also divorced, that he caught his wife in bed with his best friend, and it tore his heart out, and he ended up divorcing her. I told him that's horrible, and I understood. My husband cheated on me with a woman he met at work, and that is what caused our divorce. Well, at least part of it. So Wilson and I had that common bond together. We were both hurt. So he understood my feelings, and I told him I haven't dated since I divorced my husband, and I didn't want to meet another man like him, so I was scared to meet new people. He told me he understood, and he was in the same situation. I asked him if he had any kids, and he said, no, I don't have any children. I didn't either, as my ex-husband didn't want any. He told me he would love to start a family with me one day. I told him, well, I was getting older. I was at 38 years old, and Wilson said at the time he was 46, so there was a little bit of an age difference. But he said age is just a number, and it didn't matter. We continued chatting on Facebook, and he asked me if I'd like to chat on WhatsApp. He said he travels and doesn't always get on Facebook, but he always has WhatsApp available for doing international calling. I felt comfortable and we exchanged numbers. He added me on WhatsApp and we started talking there. He told me his life story about how he got into oil engineering, oil contracts, how he went to school at the University of Oxford. He asked about my job, which my job is pretty simple. I'm a key holder at a grocery store, which means I was in charge of a lot of money, the bookkeeping, the opening, the closing of registers, things like that, almost like an assistant manager. I don't want to say the name of the store I worked at because it's a pretty well big grocery store here in Michigan. And I've been there for 15 years. And at the time, everyone there knew and trusted me. I was a good employee and I pretty much had the keys to the kingdom, so to speak. I tried calling Wilson several times, both on video and voice, but it was always choppy sounding on the voice chat. He said the connection was poor, but he would call me soon. When I tried to video chat, he came up on the video, but it was grainy and frozen. He said being in Malaysia on the contract, they don't have the greatest internet. But one night, he did call me. But it was from a different number, and I didn't recognize it, but I picked it up. He didn't call me through WhatsApp, it was directly. He said his name was Wilson. It was him, I could hear him clearly, but he had kind of an accent. I didn't recognize it. I said, that's not a Florida accent, or even an American one for that matter. He told me due to his schooling in England, his mother originally being from Spain, his father originally from Norway, and he traveled and grown up throughout various European countries, he had a bit of a strange accent. And he hoped it didn't affect our relationship. I told him no, but he would need to speak a little slower. It was very hard to understand him. I've never really been anywhere, so I've never really spoken to anyone outside of the U.S. I know it's hard to believe, but I live in a really small town in Michigan. We don't have a lot of diversity. He was very sweet, and he talked to me most of the night, even singing songs. He told me he was falling for me, and honestly, I enjoyed the conversation. He was a sweet man, and he did very caring things. We talked about very personal things about how my ex-husband cheated on me, how it broke my heart, and how he broke my trust. And I didn't think another man could be that trustworthy. He told me to give him a chance. He's not like my ex-husband, that he would never cheat, and cheating is horrible. I gave him the benefit of the doubt. He told me how his ex cheated on him and how horrible it was for him, and how he had only wanted to have a wife and family, and that's all that mattered to him. He seemed very heartfelt and honest with his reply, and he genuinely wanted a family, and seemed to be a good man. For some reason I felt safe enough to chat with him, and at some point I gave him my address, because he had asked for it several times, but I told him no. And finally one night, after a very long and personable conversation, I felt comfortable enough, so I gave him my address. He also asked me where I worked, and I figured, since you had my address at home, you might as well know where I work. I even sent him the website to the store I work at. I worked nearly every day, and I went in early mornings because I did the bookkeeping. I counted all the registers. He would often talk to me late into the night, and it got to the point where I had to tell him he needs to call earlier or we need to talk after work. I would stay up till 4 in the morning sometimes and have to be to work by 6. I would only sleep an hour if I slept at all. I guess you could say I was addicted to him and his kind words. He agreed to call later, but he often still called me in the middle of the night. I would sometimes fall asleep on the phone, but I was in love, and I knew I was falling in love. I knew I wanted to be with him, be around him. He said he'd be returning to Florida in 2 months after his contract. He showed me photos of his work, the rig, the site, some of his colleagues, he called them. You have to understand, it wasn't about the photos. Well, yes, the photos were of a handsome man. It was more about the attention. He made me feel good, love, and affection. He was attentive, and that's something I've never gotten from a man. If I was having a bad day at work, he would call and sing to me. The emotional connection that he made meant a lot. We made plans. We would come to visit soon, get to meet each other. In a few weeks after his contract ended, we talked about a dinner date, where we would go, what we would do with each other. It was romantic. And yes, we did have a romantic relationship in every sense of the word, via long distance. It was love. Again, it wasn't about the looks. It was the personality that I fell in love with. And I can't stress this enough. Now that I'm saying what happened is not right, and I want people to understand emotionally, mentally in love with this man, and he called himself Wilson. That's all I knew of him. One night he called me, though. He was really upset. He said there was an accident at the work site, and some of his workers were injured. He was crying. I've never heard him cry before. He told me that his company was angry with him because he didn't follow safety protocol and caused the accident of one of his workers that had to be lifted to emergency surgery. Wilson said he had to pay for it, and he became angry. They said that the company froze his paychecks and that he had to take care of this problem himself, that he was at fault for the emergency surgery, and it would cost $5,000, and he didn't have that money. He was scared. I didn't know what to do, and I told him if I can help you, I will, and I guess you could say he took advantage of that. He asked me if I could send the $5,000. I told him, I don't have that kind of money. That's a lot of money for someone like myself. I did have a couple thousand tucked away in savings, and I told him it took me over a year to save this money. But I was willing to help him. Altogether, I had about $3,000 between my savings and what was in my checking. He asked me if he could borrow it, and then he would bring it back to me when he came to see me in 2 weeks' time. I told him okay and asked him how do I send the money. He said I'd have to send it to his worker in Malaysia's family. He then started going on and on about these workers and how they come into this country of Malaysia and cause problems and that they're undocumented. He said his workers were from Nigeria. I told him, well, we have undocumented workers in America too, but if they get hurt, we take care of them. He said it's different in Malaysia and he'd have to pay for it. He badmouthed all these workers from Nigeria. He said he would go to jail if he didn't pay the money. He asked me if I would do a bank transfer from my account to the worker's family in Malaysia. He gave me the name of a man to send the money to. He said it was a brother of the injured worker. He was in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. They were expecting to pay right away. I went to do an online bank transfer, And I told him, but it would take a couple days just to arrive because my bank holds international transfers for up to 3 days. He was upset by that and said he can't wait 3 days. He needs the money now. I had no choice, and I asked him what I can do. I can just go ahead and send it. He told me no, and to wire the money via Western Union. I've never wired money via Western Union, and he said it's really easy. I know my store does Western Union. I see people send money all the time, but I've never done it myself, so the money, instead of doing a bank transfer, I canceled that idea and went to the store to do Western Union. It actually cost quite a bit of money to transfer that much money, and I would have to fill out a form because it was over $2,000. I told him this, and Wilson became upset. He said no, to just do a $500 transfer several times. He said it would be easier and there'd be no questions asked. Well, I ended up doing 2 transfers at my store, and that's all they would do. I had to go to another Western Union to finish the transfers. By the end of it, I ended up going to 3 different stores and doing a total of $3,000 altogether. And it cost quite a bit extra money just for the transfer service, and I told him that. He said he would pay me back double when he came to see me. So we agreed that he would pay me back a total of $6,000. He said his worker was able to get the surgery, and he even sent me a photo of a man in a hospital bed saying that was his worker, and the surgery was complete. He said he was making his plans to fly home, and even sent me a copy of a flight ticket from Kuala Lumpur to Miami. He then sent me another ticket going from Miami to Michigan. It was really happening. I was excited and I was nervous. I had told a couple of my coworkers about it, and they were happy for me. I even went and bought myself a nice new outfit to wear, so when I met him at the airport, everything was ready. I was preparing to meet this man of my dreams. The day came and he was going to board the flight. He sent me a text saying he was boarding now from Kuala Lumpur and he couldn't wait to see me. I told him to text me when he got to his first stop, as he had 4 stops just on his way home to Florida. The first stop was in London, and I didn't hear from him for over a day. I became concerned. But then I figured some flight delays, it might take a while to get through the airport. I didn't want to seem like an obsessed girlfriend, but then I started calling him incessantly. I tried to get a hold of him. I even called the airline to check and confirm the flight, if he made the flight. They couldn't tell me if he was on the flight, but they checked the flight numbers and told me the flight did arrive and land safely. They even gave me the time it arrived. So I became worried. And finally Wilson called me. I could barely understand him. He was screaming on the phone. It sounded like he was fighting with someone, and then he hung up. He then texted me saying he had been detained at Heathrow Airport. He said one of the workers' family members tried to extort more money from him because of the accident, and he didn't want to ask me for more money because he was too embarrassed. They wanted a $5,000 payoff because of the injuries. He said that since he didn't pay the money they wanted, the family reported him to the government for insurance and accident fraud, and they told the government about the payoff. He said he got stopped at the airport and that he was being detained for fraud purposes. He said that he could pay off the officials, but it would cost $6,000. Well, I didn't have that kind of money, and he told me he couldn't ask his employer because then they'd find out about the accident and how he tried to cover it up. He begged me for the $6,000 to pay off the government officials at the Heathrow Airport.